So today I want to go over one of the strongest Prismatic Warlock builds I've seen that also has a pretty big emphasis on generating an absurd amount of orbs of power. Now this is going to be built around our exotic class items, so you are going to need some specific roles to make the most out of this build. Now the roles we're using on our exotic class item is going to be Spirit of Inmost Light, so using an ability empowers the other two abilities, granting them improved energy regeneration. Now this is the exotic effect that you don't need for the build to work, but it does synergize pretty heavily. And then the more important part of the build is Spirit of the Star Eater, which is while your super energy is full, picking up an orb of power overcharges your super, granting it bonus damage. Now how this works is that once you have your super ready to go, you can pick up to 6 orbs of power to get more damage. And at 6 stacks, your super will deal 70% increased damage. And we are going to be using Song of Flame, and what's really cool with mixing these effects with Song of Flame is that not only will all of your abilities in Song of Flame be doing 70% extra damage, but the ignitions you create while in Song of Flame will also get that 70% damage buff. So Star Eater mixed with Song of Flame is absolutely ridiculous. But that brings us right into our ability choices. As we went over, we're taking Song of Flame as our super. As our class ability, we're going to be using Phoenix Dive. This is just so we can have Hellion up as much as possible. For our melee, we're going to be using Arcane Needle, an incredibly strong melee. You get all 3 charges back when you pop Transcendence. It does really good damage. It allows you to unravel enemies, and it's going to be dealing dark damage, so we can get the darkness side of our Transcendence meter much more quickly with Arcane Needle. Now the grenade we're going to be using is Vortex Grenade, and this is going to synergize it pretty heavily with one of our fragments, which is the main reason we're using it. And then for our aspects, we're going to be using Feed the Void, so defeat a target with any ability to activate Devour. This will include things like Hellion, and when you get kills, when you have Devour, it heals you and gives you grenade energy back. And with Feed the Void, your Devour effects are increased, so you'll get more health and more grenade energy. It gives you like 200 health and quite a lot of grenade energy, so Feed the Void is just absolutely ridiculous. Then we're going to be using Hellion. When you activate your class ability, you get a Solar Mortar. It's just going to be lobbing attacks at super long range on enemies, which do scorch targets and build up to an ignition. Hellion actually deals a ridiculous amount of damage. And then we have our fragments, starting with Facet of Hope. While you have an elemental buff, your class ability regenerates more quickly and will basically always have an elemental buff. And this actually seems to be very strong. From the testing I've seen, this is like a 60% increase, because the main thing we're trying to get to is to have Phoenix Dive up enough to where we can always have Hellion up. Then we're going to be using Facet of Balance. Rapidly defeating targets with light damage grants melee energy. Rapidly defeating targets with darkness damage grants grenade energy, and we'll be dealing both, so we'll just be getting more melee and grenade energy. Then we're going to be using Facet of Awakening. Rapidly defeating targets with light or darkness or super final blows generates an elemental pickup of the matching damage type. And we're going to be able to proc quite a lot of this. We're going to be getting more Tangles. We're going to be getting Void Breaches from our grenade. We're going to be getting Fire Sprites from our super, and Hellion can also proc this to get Fire Sprites as well. Then we're going to be using Facet of Dominance. Your Void Grenades weaken and Arc Grenades jolt. Now we're not going to be using Arc Grenades, so this is primarily so our Vortex and our Transcendence Grenades are both going to weaken targets, which is obviously incredibly strong. And then finally, we're using Facet of Generosity. Defeating targets while transcended creates orbs of power for your allies. Now this is actually an incredibly important part of this build that synergizes very heavily with our exotic class item. Now this fragment seems incredibly strong but pretty hard to test. So just getting any kills while transcendent will spawn additional orbs of power. So say you already have a mod that gives you an orb of power if you get a grenade kill. If you're in Transcendence, Facet of Generosity will just give you another orb of power. So you'll get 1 grenade kill, you'll get 2 orbs of power. Same for your melee damage, same for just getting kills with your weapons. So you're kind of just doubling your orb of power generation, but this does stack with some other stuff that makes it kind of ridiculous, because if you pop your Transcendence and go in your super, so Song of Flame, this does stack. So you could legitimately get a handful of kills with your Transcendence popped while in Song of Flame, and you'll generate like a dozen plus orbs. It's pretty ridiculous, but Facet of Generosity does seem to have some type of cap, just like how most supers have a cap on how many orbs of power they can generate, but it just generates you a ridiculous amount of additional orbs of power. So you and your allies will just be getting a ton of additional super energy, and you'll be proccing all of your other effects that proc from you picking up orbs of power. And as we went over, this is going to synergize very heavily with Spirit of the Star Eater, because once we get our super, we want to be able to get our 6 orbs of power very quickly. So you're just going to be alternating between Transcendence and between your super to be able to just get both of them back very quickly, get all of your Star Eater stacks before using your super, and then get your super back very quickly while being in Transcendence, while getting a bunch of additional orbs of power. And then next up, we have our artifact. Now you can use whatever you want in the first row to counter champions. I've been using anti-barrier pulse rifle, unstoppable sidearm, and then the third really doesn't matter. And I'll go over some options I've been using if you're doing higher tier content, so you want to be able to more easily counter champions. In the second row, we're using overcharge armory. So weapons with these origin traits are always overcharged when that modifier is active. And this is primarily because we're going to be using a lot of dealer choice weapons. And then we're going to be using winning hand. While using weapons with the dealer choice origin trait, combatant precision final blows or rapidly defeated combatants cause the target to explode, dealing solar damage to nearby enemies, and having multiple of dealer choice origin trait increases the effect of the explosion. Now, if we're not doing super hard content where we want to be able to counter champions much more easily, we're going to be using 3 dealer choice weapons because it's just so strong right now. Then in the third row, we have press the advantage, breaking a combatant's shield grants increased weapon stability, handling, and reload speed. Then we have threaded blast, destroying a tangle with a strand weapon creates a larger and more damaging explosion. This is actually very strong. We're going to be using a strand weapon as our primary, but we can also generate tangles with our melee, and then shooting them with a strand weapon does a massive explosion. Then in the next row, we have counter energy. When you or a member of your fire team stuns a champion, gain energy for your least charge ability. Then we're going to be using void hegemony. While you have a void or prismatic subclass, defeating weakened targets provides a small overshield. And with what we're using, our normal grenade and our transcendence grenade weaken targets, so killing any targets hit by our grenade will also give us some overshield. Then we're using radiant orbs. When you have a solar or prismatic subclass, picking up an orb of power gives you radiant, and this lasts for 10 seconds. And we're obviously pretty focused on generating orbs of power, so we'll just have radiant all the time. Then in the final row, we're using shield crush. When you have woven mail, frost armor, or avoid overshield, your melee recharges faster and deals increased damage. We'll have overshield some of the time. And then while you're amplified or radiant, your grenade recharges faster and deals increased damage. We have radiant a lot of the time, so some pretty massive buffs. Then finally, we're using transference. Gain increased grenade and melee damage while transcendent. Very good. This synergizes with our other effects like generating more orbs of power while transcendent, so we can kill things easier to get more orbs of power. Then weapon final blows while transcendent refund light and dark energy after transcendence ends. And that brings us to our armor mod. Starting off with our helmet, we're going to be using a strand siphon, so rapid strand weapon final blows create another orb of power. This does stack when we're in transcendence, and our primary weapon is going to be strand. But if you want to use a weapon that's not strand as your primary weapon, just switch up to whatever weapon type you're going to be using. Then ashes to assets, gain bonus super energy and grenade kills, and then special ammo finder to find more special ammo because the main weapon I'm using is a special weapon. And then on our gauntlets, we're going to be using firepower, so your grenade final blows create an orb of power. And again, this does stack while in transcendence, so you get a kill with a grenade, it gives you 2 orbs of power. Then heavy-handed, your powered melee final blows create an orb of power, and again, it stacks while in transcendence. And then we're going to be using grenade kickstart, which when you collect an orb of power, you get an armor charge up to 3 stacks. And when your grenade energy is expended, so when you use your grenade, your armor charges are consumed to give you grenade energy back. I think this is around 28% at 3 charges, so we'll just be getting a bunch of our grenade back right when we use it because we generate so many orbs of power. Then for your chest armor, you're just going to be using whatever damage reductions you currently want to use depending on what content you're in. And then for our legs, we're going to be using 3 stacks of absolution. Reduces all ability cooldowns each time you pick up an orb of power, so this will just help to spam out even more abilities. And then for our class item, we're going to be using 2 stacks of distribution, so reduces all ability cooldowns when you use your class ability near targets. Our class ability also has a very low cooldown base and will be regenerating a lot more. And then bomber reduces grenade cooldown when using your class ability, so again, just more ability spam. And then for our weapons, I'm currently using the Call as my primary weapon. I've gone over this in multiple videos now. In all of my builds, I've been using this. Pretty much everybody's using this thing right now. It's probably the strongest legendary weapon of the game. It's absolutely ridiculous. It synergizes pretty well because it's strand. It's just incredibly strong, so you kill everything easily. Then if I'm not doing super high-end content where I want to easily be able to counter all champions, I'm going to be using two other dealer's choice weapons. And I'm currently using No Hesitation, which is the first support frame weapon. This thing's actually incredibly good, especially when you're in a fire team like I've been running some Onslaught, and just being able to keep my teammates alive by dealing damage with this and then healing them. It heals your allies so incredibly quickly, and then this weapon is just pretty good by itself. Then it gives you another stack of dealer's choice to get more super energy. And then I've been using Pro Memoria, a strand machine gun, really good for ad clear, and again gives you another stack of dealer's choice. Now if I'm going into higher tier content, say I'm doing Master Nightfalls, I'll still be using the Call because it's so strong and it counters unstoppable. I would be switching my secondary slot up to a pulse rifle. I've just been using the BXR Battler. This will counter barrier, and then I've been switching up to the Thunderlord, which has innate counter to overload. But that's the entirety of this build, and this build has been incredibly fun to play, especially just seeing how many orbs of power you can generate. I did an expert onslaught run where I got over 1,000 kills, which was more than both my teammates combined, and I generated over 400 orbs of power. That's as much or more orbs of power you could generate on, say, a Tether Hunter that's fully based around generating orbs of power for you and your fire team. And this build can do that as well, while also being a build focused around dealing massive amounts of damage. So this is definitely a build I'd recommend trying out. It's even going to be better with fire teams because you just generate orbs of power that your fire team can also pick up. So it's just ridiculously strong whether you're solo or with a group. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.